Hi, this is Greg Gantt. I am the Community Outreach Director for InTRAC Relay Indiana, and this is your Assistive Technology Update.
Okay, you guys, today we're doing something super cool and a little bit different than we have done in the past. If you looked at the headline of the episode, you know that we're going to talk about apps that are important to people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And although we've been transcribing our shows for a long time, today is the first time we are going to do an ASL or American Sign Language primary interview on our audio podcast. So I'm asking your permission if I mess this up. We may have to do it again sometime, but we're learning a few things as we go along here. So I reached out to one of my friends, Greg Gantt, who is with Indiana Relay here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and said, Greg, could you come in and talk with us a little bit about apps that are important for people who are deaf or hard of hearing? And he said, yeah, we can do that. So we started thinking about the logistics of an ASL primary interview today, and we thought we need to do a couple of things. We will obviously have the transcript of the show released at the time or very shortly after the show comes out. We're also going to have a YouTube video that shows Greg interviewing in ASL primary. So if you want to see ASL, or if that's your primary language, go to the links in the show notes to the YouTube video and you can see us in studio and get the ASL version of what we're doing. I will edit the interview just a little bit. There may be some silence in the interview as we do the interpreting process. So I may edit a little bit of that out, but really you won't know because you're hearing it now post edit. And also we are joined today by Andy Rourke, who's providing interpreting services. So thank you for being with us, Andy. He will be voicing for Greg today. Okay, I think that's the housekeeping stuff. Now I can actually conduct an interview. So first and foremost, Greg, thank you for coming and being in our studio today. We're so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you too. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here and to be able to share information on communication technology for deaf and hard of hearing people. That's just a pleasure to be here.
So we're excited to have you. One of the first questions I want to know is, Greg, people don't know you, and I've known you for a number of years now, but tell us a little bit about you, your background, and what you do for a living, and then we'll get into apps and technology here in a minute.
Sure. I grew up here in Indiana. I've lived here my whole life. I attended Gallaudet University, where I majored in business administration. After that, I worked within the deaf community. I worked at Deaf Community Services for 7 years in different capacities, and then I worked for the state Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services as a program director. I worked for Sprint Relay when Relay first began in 1990. I worked for Sprint and worked there for about 10 or 11 years. And then from there, I went to my current position as Community Relations Outreach for InTRAC, which is an agency that provides Relay Indiana services and has for the past 11 years.
So Greg, not everybody in our audience is going to be familiar with Relay and those kind of things. Can you tell us just a quick piece about what a Relay service is and does?
Sure. A Relay service it's a catch-all term for a lot of different services. There are relay services out there that provide technology access for deaf and hard of hearing people or speech-impaired people to people who use regular telephones. When the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, was enacted in 1990, we had technology at the time called a TTY or a TDD, a teletype, a godsend. Us to through a phone, then type the responses from the hearing person. So that was great back then. Evolves and changes. There are different relay. Now we have what's called video relay services, where we also have voice recognition relay for the purposes of relay services. They are to provide communication access between a deaf and hard of hearing or speech impaired person
about the first time an app or technology made a really big impact on your life. Tell me about that. The first time you went, wow, this technology is a game changer.
Way to explain that is what really impacted technology, what impacted education was messaging. Or the Wintel devices. It was a text-only pager. It was a game changer for the deaf community. We got them. Over time, a signing deaf person, first time definitely, has been the big game changer. It's visual. You can see each other signing. That really, and that led to a lot of other technologies and a lot of other apps that go with video for people who.
I know that in the world of assistive technology, the iPhone has made a huge impact on people with disabilities. But I wonder where that fits in the deaf and hard of hearing communities. Does the smartphone, whether it's an iPhone or an Android, I don't really care, but are there things about a smartphone by itself really, really important?
Yeah, smartphones, whether it's an iPhone or an Android, I think is one of the biggest game changers, not just in our lives, but hearing lives as well. It hasn't necessarily leveled the playing field, but it's made it really close. It's really evened out the game. It's closed that communication gap. Before smartphones, we on TTY, rely on interpreters and neighbors, and it made our deafness very pronounced, very noticeable. But with texting, with smartphones, people don't know that I'm deaf if I'm walking along texting somebody, or if I'm using my phone just as anybody else would. With more and more apps that are coming out, the video apps that are coming out, the recognition apps, kind of.
Yeah, and you know, when you talk about just the smartphone in general and communication tools, I see that. And I also have a number of deaf friends that I interact with on social media, and I've experienced that because I don't sign, my engagement changes on Facebook and other social media platforms because of that more level playing field. Has that been your experience too? Is it?
Definitely. Because media outlet. Where before I have involved with model that builds models, able to communicate. Yeah, so yeah, Facebook, Instagram, all those social media outlets have really changed the game too.
So let's talk about apps, right? We said we were going to talk about a number of apps that every person who's deaf or hard of hearing should either have or know about. And so let's just start going through those. Give me an app that you think every person who's deaf or hard of hearing should either have or know about.
Okay. And categorize them in two different categories: for signing deaf people or deaf or hard of hearing people sign. For signing deaf people, I think one of the most important apps we've already mentioned is FaceTime. Really changed the game. There are apps that are for video relay purposes, where I can open an app and I can call either somebody who signs directly, or I can go through a relay service to talk to somebody who doesn't sign. So I don't have to sit here or have a standalone unit in front of me with a monitor and a webcam. I can call you, Wade, from my phone, just with the built-in camera that's there. There are 3 companies that provide video relay. There's Sprint, Convo, and not Sprint, I'm sorry, Z Video Relay, Convo, and Sorensen. Those are the 3 companies, the 3 major companies that provide video relay service, and they provide apps for that. fourth technology like that would be FaceTime. Also an app called Glide. The Arrive Glide, when that first came out, people who invented Glide envisioned it for hearing people to talk to each other, and they were shocked that the deaf community really grabbed it and took it as a main app, to the point where Glide, the deaf community for the past few years, to get feedback and changes to the app. Now, it's a video where you record. It's rather a video message that I can send to somebody else. And then if you have Glide, you can open it up, see it, and then you can respond back messaging. Marco Polo is a little bit newer, and deaf people now are kind of going to both. I have them both on my phone. We mentioned FaceTime. Snapchat is another one, but that is typically for the younger generation. I don't use Snapchat as often, but I do monitor Snapchat and some of its possibilities. But those are pretty much the apps for the signing deaf community. For people who are hard of hearing, we have a technology called CapTel. And there's an app along with that where you can make a phone to a hearing person for hard of hearing people who can speak for themselves, but they can't hear over the phone. So when the hearing person responds back, it will have a voice recognition with a readout, so they can read the captioning. There's also another app for those who still prefer to type through the relay service, and there's Sprint IP Relay, which is an app that you can download on your phone to use the good old typing back and forth technology. There are less and less standalone video phone units and more apps that are coming out for your smartphones, for your iPads, for your tablets. CapTel still has some standalone units for people who still prefer to use those.
Excellent, cool. So those apps are all specific to interpersonal communication and those kind of things. Are there any other apps that you find that you use every day related to your deafness or your sign language use they're important?
Every morning with my cup of coffee, I get on different news outlets to see what's going on in the world. I do, there are deaf news websites. There's one called The Daily Moth, which is news presented in American Sign Language, so I do take a look at those. But for me personally, I use apps that I just mentioned for communication. Other people do, keep up on Facebook and things like that. And of course, there are games. Scrabble, which I like to play. So, yeah.
Word with Friends. Do you play Words with Friends?
Yeah, exactly.
So send me a request. I'll play you. You'll win because I'm horrible at it, but I like to play.
I'm equally horrible. Several friends who starting to question my word knowledge, I think.
So Greg, where do you learn about apps? Is this word of mouth? People talking about it? Is there a website that you go to?
I learned about it through a variety of different ways. In my line of work, I am often on the cutting edge of technology that's coming out for deaf people and communications, and in my past jobs too with Sprint. So I kind of know what's on the horizon, what's coming down the pipeline. However, I also do learn from friends and through the grapevine. Marco Polo I didn't know about until a friend of mine told me about it. So yeah, it's a combination of both. What was the other part of that question?
Other websites or places you go online to look for them if you...
I don't think there are any specific websites that are dedicated to deaf apps that I'm aware of, but again, deaf people are very resourceful, and we just find ways to navigate life, especially through Facebook sharing and things like that.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned Marco Polo. My 21-year-old daughter and my wife and her friends are all starting to do Marco Polo. So I have it on my phone as well, and I get requests, but so far I've been ignoring them. I just haven't been responding to them, but I see that coming up as being more popular as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Greg, what's on your wish list for an ideal app? And whether it's deaf-related or not, what's your number one wish for an app that would really make a huge difference in your life?
For me, it's a device or technology that I can bring with me to where I can interact, no offense, but where I can interact directly without having to have an interpreter or a third person. Because you bless all the interpreters that are out there that are working, but a lot of times that third person can be disorienting. Most of the time hearing people are communicating one-on-one, and when you pull in a third person, some people are fine with it, but other people aren't. It can be awkward and uncomfortable. So it would just be nice if you and I could communicate directly without having to use an interpreter. I've seen some technology out there at different conferences. It's a hologram where you would have kind of an interpreter in hologram form, but it's still in its extreme infancy. But there's potential there, and there's the idea there that you'd be able to pull up an interpreting hologram. And I would be able to see the hologram signing. So there's that. Another thing would be a voice to text technology where you can just talk and it would instantly recognize what you're saying. Now the question is, how would my signing be recognized to have voice? So there's work being done out there to be able to interpret from signing into voice. There are people who have had the monitors on their bodies as they're signing, that you've seen technology like that to capture signing. So my dream would be, the ideal app, whatever it looks like, would be something that would enable you and I to communicate directly without having to use an interpreter.
Yeah, and it might be worth a quick piece of conversation here about, we don't call it language translation, right? It's called interpreting for a reason, because it's not directly one-to-one. If we have audience members who aren't familiar with how American Sign Language or sign language works, it's not simply the same as reading a transcript or a one-to-one, right? So there's part of the reason it's hard to make an app that does that is because there's a human touch, right? There's a linguistic piece in there that needs to happen. So tell me just a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, and you bring up a very valid point. What I just stated for that one-on-one communication and app, if it's somebody that I know, that I have a business relationship with or familiar relationship with personally, there's that. But then if there's a bigger audience, if there's more than one person, you might need an interpreter. If I have a doctor's appointment and we're talking about some medical terms, maybe having an interpreter there would be more ideal than trying to navigate or trying to capture all of those medical technology. Mental health counseling, kind of depending on the situation, but a presentation where there's an audience and to be able to have an interpreter reflect the tone of the speaker is a very valuable, that human touch. And that's something that you can never get rid of. It will always have to be an option down the road.
Well, yeah, and I think this morning in our interaction before we started recording is a good example. I signed just a tiny bit, and I was able to figure out, you wanted some coffee, and I was able to get that and greet you and those kind of things. And you and I know each other and have for a long time, so we can sort of get by in that way with my limited sign. But for this interview, no way. We absolutely have to have an interpreter. So I think that's a pretty good example that we've just kind of lived out this morning.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so another quick technology question. Is there a technology that is almost there, that is getting pretty good, and you think it just needs a little bit more to get good? Is there any stuff that you think is almost a game changer? And you can say no if there's not an answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of technology out there that's already out there, but there are other things that could be tweaked or improved upon. Closed captioning, for example. I mean, it's such an important tool that we use, but it's not 100% accurate. There's so many shows or commercials that aren't captioned, or the captioning doesn't work correctly. Sometimes the captioning is delayed. I mean, we're in 2018, and we can put a man on the moon, but we still can't figure out a way to fix how to caption things correctly. In an ideal situation, everything would be captioned, all TV shows, everything. And I'm sure we're going to get there. I'm sure eventually we'll get there. And it's the same with the internet too. When I'm looking on the internet, there's so many wonderful things that close the communication gap, but at the same time, there are things that don't close the communication gap at all, because internet videos are not captioned. There are some that are, and I've noticed some improvements where there is a closed captioning option, but we're not there yet. Looking back to where there was before internet, before the ADA, yeah, we've definitely come a long way, but we do still have a long ways to go.
Well, and I think the format we're using today is an example of that. I mean, podcasts, there aren't a lot of deaf-friendly transcribed podcasts out there, and we do our best to make sure that we are approaching that as appropriately as we can, but I think that's another example of an area of content that probably isn't. I mean, right, or set me straight if I'm wrong about that, but there aren't podcasts, right, that are deaf-friendly.
And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Podcasts are foreign to a deaf person's vocabulary. I don't think most deaf people even know what a podcast is, because it's audio based, and most of the time, there may be a few. There are a few out there that I commend, like NPR. They have transcribed podcasts, which I do take a look at. But you're right, the podcasts are foreign to deaf people, and I'm so excited to be in this situation now, to have this opportunity to be part of a podcast. So not just for the hearing people out there who are listening, but for deaf people to realize that we can make this work too.
And it's still a fairly new word in English. Is there a sign for podcast?
There is not. We finger spell it. I could say, or sometimes we say radio podcast, but we have to finger spell the word podcast.
Excellent. Okay. What's your advice for somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing and just doesn't want to embrace technology? Maybe it's somebody who's very young and isn't interested in technology, or somebody who might be older. But if people just say, no, I'm deaf or I'm hard of hearing and I'm not into technology, what advice would you have for them?
And again, there are groups of people. You have younger deaf people. Younger deaf people blow me away with their knowledge of technology. I mean, cell phones have been part of their entire lives, and it's an option at their disposal, and it's always been. And there are different ways people can communicate. Some people prefer Snapchat, some people prefer texting. It just depends on the person's personal preference. I'm pretty much limited in what I'm willing to do. But then there are those deaf people who either aren't interested in technology and need to learn about it, or there are people who maybe are older in age who are trying to learn technology. Otherwise, if they don't, they're going to be left in the dust, because technology is just advancing so rapidly. So, yeah, just a basic understanding of technology, texting at the very least. I know some people who don't text at all. They still would rather use their old TTY, and I don't know how much more you can coach them into using technology.
Excellent. All right, Greg, I'm sure there are people who are going to hear this interview and be excited about what we're doing today, and they're going to want to reach out to you. Do you have any contact information that you'd like to provide so that people can reach out to you, learn more about you, ask questions, those kind of things?
Oh, sure, absolutely. First of all, for more information on Relay Indiana, you can go to our website, www.relayindiana.com, and there is a lot of information on there about relay services in general. So if you want to reach me directly, you can reach me through email at greg.gantt, G-A-N-T-T, at relayindiana.com. If you want to call me, you can reach me at 317-542-3600. 888-888-8224. If you're hearing or deaf, you can call that same phone number. And again, this is another technology that's out there. My phone number is in a user database that is recognized depending on the incoming call. If I'm getting a direct video call, it'll automatically come to my video call. If you're hearing, it'll automatically go through a video relay service. So either way, you can reach me at that number.
So Greg, thank you so much for being on the show today, and thanks for helping us walk through the logistics of working through the ASL and interpreting and those kind of things. And thank you also, Andy Rourke, for interpreting and voicing for us today.
Well, I thank you too, Wade, for this opportunity to educate both the deaf and hard of hearing and the hearing communities about these issues. So thank you so much, Wade, for the opportunity.